Today we're joined on Savvy Business Radio by Lata Nott, Executive Director of the Freedom Forum Institute's First Amendment Center, located at the offices at Newseum in Washington, D.C. Today we discuss First Amendment myths and reality. Find out more about the First Amendment Center and Newseum by visiting freedomforuminstitute.org. Hi, Lata. Welcome to Savvy Business Radio for our Heartbeat of the World segment. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing fabulous. I'm so pleased to have you here today from the First Amendment Center. It is so important to talk about it. It's interesting. I never thought much about the First Amendment all my time growing up and as a young adult, and until lately when you hear it spoken about all over the place. But I think there's a lot of misconceptions of what the First Amendment is all about and what it's really protecting. Share with the audience, before we go into all those nitty-gritty details, share with the audience a little bit about your background, though.
Sure. I'm a lawyer, and I relate to the feeling that when I was growing up, I can't say that I thought intensely about the First Amendment, because it is one of those things everybody kind of thinks they understand without too much further into it. But I was a litigator for several years, and I did a lot of litigation work that involved technology. And it's interesting how technology and free speech are so related, especially these days. You know, there's so many cutting-edge free speech issues involved. What does speech mean? Is code speech? Is 3D printing speech? How does online speech get regulated? So that's kind of how I came to my work at the First Amendment Center.
Wow. And it's true, because I hadn't thought about it. And then a couple of years ago, there was a movie that came out, and I can't recall the name of it, but basically it was done by a bunch of comedians saying that there's been a lot of onslaught against them, saying certain comedy isn't acceptable, and they're kind of putting bars on what they can and can't do comedy about. And the comedians were like, this is nuts, because everyone should be able to do comedy, because the whole point of comedy is to come out, see real life, and kind of make fun of it in a way that people can relate to, and also keep people privy to what's going on in life. Just another, like when you go see a play, it's another way to look at life in a different way. And they said we can't have our free speech taken away from us when we're trying to do comedy here. This is just going to hit all parts of life. And when I heard that, I said, yeah, you're right. I mean, if I don't like a certain comedy that I feel is offensive to me, I will personally not go see that person do their comedy. But to say that we don't want certain comedy because it's uncomfortable to us, or we don't like what they're saying, it'll start hitting all parts of life. And I remember having an argument with a friend. Well, they said, well, comedy's gone too far, and look at commercials where they kind of sexify everything, and maybe we need to pull the bars back a little bit. And then I said to her, but who gets to choose what's too much, what's too little, and what we get to say and not say? Then we're turning into a tyrannical society, which is just what our founding fathers created the First Amendment for. Share your thoughts on that.
I think that's a good point, in that, well, first of all, so much about comedy is about transgressing boundaries. So, of course, comedians will cross the line, because that's kind of that's what comedians end up doing. It's sort of interesting how that develops. But another thing that's interesting is that what you said about who gets to decide, because I think when somebody speaks out and says that's offensive to me, that's also an exercise of free speech. I am totally fine with people calling people out, saying I don't think you should have said that. That's a conversation that we have a lot. Mm-hmm. The problem is when it comes to deciding, we're not going to have and again, the First Amendment always applies to the government and not private people or corporations or organizations. Yeah. So that's one thing. If you're I'm not going to invite you to my comedy club because I think you're offensive. But when we start doing things like, we're going to have a public college, you can't say something that will offend another student. Mm-hmm. The problem with that is that the definition about what's offensive varies a lot from person to person. Mm-hmm. And it's not that I think that, yes, we should be offended all the time. That's so great. It's more that who decides what's offensive, and at what point, people sometimes advocate for policies that would curb the speech of people they disagree with, or people they don't like or find offensive. But those same policies and regulations and laws can eventually be used against you, because I'm sure that whatever we say is offensive to someone else,
Yeah, absolutely. And what's interesting is if anyone, and I know I was blessed because the school I went to actually had us learn all the amendments and the Constitution. We had to read it. It was a mandatory reading and understanding of the of the Constitution. I, at the time, thought this is outdated, ancient document. Why are we even studying this thing? I thought. And then we even had the teacher who would make us stand up, you have the floor for 5 minutes, like we're on the Senate floor or something. I'm like, what are you doing? This is a classroom. But I hated it at the time, but now I'm blessed because now, I mean, at the time I didn't have an understanding, but now looking back at it, I'm starting to understand that, you know, this is a really awesome document that no one else had lived by, and that other countries are not blessed to have free speech. Now, look at it. It says that Congress shall pass no law against free speech. So people think, oh, well, you know, it's about Congress, as you said, the government getting in the way of the people's free speech. It's not about government or federal government coming in and deciding what should or shouldn't be free speech, because then you're doing the opposite of what the First Amendment was protecting.
Right. And First great that like they did that in school. It's civic education isn't mandatory anymore, which I think is problematic. People's understanding of the Constitution. But yeah, I mean, it's basically, it just says Congress shall make no law. That was later extended so that states and local governments, or they're not going to make any laws, or they can't make any laws that would censor speech or punish speech. And, you know, that leaves a lot of room for us to like criticize other speech because hey, that's what we do, right? But but it just says that like even if that speech is incredibly critical to the government, even if the government doesn't like it, even you still have the right to say it. And that I think is a really important concept, and it's so much a part of our DNA as a country. It's essential for us.
Yeah, it is. And when you look at other countries where you could be killed by the government for saying certain things that, you know, they don't agree with, it's a blessing that we should want to keep and not disbar and get rid of and say, well, we want to just have the government control and decide what's right and what's not, what's good and what's not.
Right. Even if you're utterly in support of whatever government is currently in power, there will come a day when you're not, and you disagree with what they want to censor. And so the idea that whatever the government is, whoever the party in control is, they don't, or, you know, even the party that's not in control, neither of them have the right to say that, like, well, no, this topic is off limits. That's
absolutely.
Yeah.
It's kind of nutters. But where's this idea? Now, this is something that seems new to me, the whole idea of hate speech. I don't even recall hearing such a thing a couple of years ago. Where did this come from, and how did this transpire that we started to decide that certain things are hate speech and other things are not?
You know, I think that with the world's a bit more connected than it used to be. So I think like a lot of people who always found something offensive, like now it's like, oh, now more people know that like, oh, people find this offensive, you know, that kind of, where I remember having a conversation with someone once where they said like, you know, I don't know what the big deal is with Halloween costumes. Like when I was a kid, I dressed up as all sorts of things and nobody found it offensive. I'm like, I mean, maybe somebody did, you just wouldn't have known about it, you know? So on one hand, I understand why people think that hate speech is something that should be left out of the conversation, because it's just, you know, it's speech that attacks someone on the basis of race, sexuality, religion, gender, national origin. I kind of think of these as like things that you can't change, things that make you, like not something you did, but something that attacks you based on who you are. And you understand why people are like, well, why should that be allowed? That's terrible. Yeah. Agreed. But it's just, hate speech is also a kind of amorphous thing, because you have to think about what it means to attack someone. And like, to give you an example, you know, like colleges will often institute hate speech codes and things like that. Like a code to stop, say, a white supremacist group from forming on campus by saying, well, this, you're not allowed to form an organization that is, you know, predicated in like an opposition to somebody else on the basis of race, gender, et cetera, right? But, you know, the same code could be used to say, well, this group that advocates for a two-state solution in Palestine, technically you could say, well, I find that attacking someone on the basis of religion, you know. You could say that about a lot of different groups, you know, not that are not necessarily what we would think of as hate groups, but sort of pieces in the eye of the beholder in a way. As much as I'm not a fan of hate groups, and you get down the road of saying like, well, okay, we need to shut down things that are offensive to other people. It depends on who's deciding, right? And like everyone, I'm like, if the person who's deciding isn't me, then I'm not sure if I would agree with every decision they would make.
Yeah, yeah. And it becomes tricky. And what have you found are some of the biggest myths people have around the First Amendment? Because I find the First Amendment will say, well, doing certain actions, that's protection of my free speech. Now, isn't speech just speech, or is it covered under actions and way of you expressing yourself a certain way?
Oh, well, that's a big thing because, of course, the First Amendment protects speech, but it doesn't protect conduct or actions. But then there's a question of like, okay, what's the line there? Big misconceptions, I'd say. Well, the biggest one is that the First Amendment applies to private interactions and parties. And every time someone gets fired from Roseanne was fired, was she fired? I think, or, her show was canceled 2 weeks ago. And every time that happens, people always call and say, have her First Amendment rights been violated? And, it's like, well, no. I mean, in the same way that your boss could fire you for something you said, because the First Amendment doesn't really apply to private organizations and companies. Also, conversation with the whole thing about Facebook and Spotify and Apple taking down the Alex Jones and InfoWars podcast.
Yeah.
His First Amendment rights haven't been violated because private platforms, and they can decide what's on them. There is a big conversation to be had about, if there comes a day when these big tech companies, when they're basically a complete monopoly over communication on the internet, and if they all ban somebody, then it becomes a question where have they gotten so big that they should be like public utilities, like the electric company that the government regulate. I don't know if that's an ideal solution, but it's like a conversation we're having.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So
because it gets me thinking, because, at the point, you can look at someone and say, hey, I think they're a little nutty, I don't like them. But to say I want them barred, it's like, well, like the comedians, I said to my friend, if you don't like them and you find them offensive, I don't go to their shows. If you don't like, something like Alex Jones, I just don't turn them on, right? But so I find it kind of weird that people are like, let's shut it down, shut it down, shut it down. It's hate speech. And I'm like thinking, but then tomorrow it could be CNN that, they say is hate speech and they don't like, so where does it get drawn, where today is the thing you like, you get your news from, you trust it, it's a source you go to. But today they're saying, well, we don't trust that and we're shutting it down because we find it to be hateful, offensive, or whatever. It's the same thing. So it's a bigger thing than just Alex Jones being shut down. It could be something you find, a credible source and you want to get your news from. And now they're saying, well, we don't. We think it should be non-existent anymore.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think that it's weird because if you think about Spotify or the Apple Store, if you think of it like, oh, it's a store. They can decide to sell in their store. That's them. If you look at it like that, you're like, yeah, sure, ban whatever you want.
Yeah.
Which they can right now. But then if there's only one store, you know what I mean? Or if there's only a set of stores and there's no other way to get this podcast or product or whatever, then you start to think like, oh, so you can de facto censor someone out of existence. That's when you get a little bit like, wait, I don't know if this is ideal. Because right now with Alex Jones, you can find his podcast online without too much trouble. It's places where he is. Does it become a different conversation if he's nowhere?
Yeah. And the thing that scares me is that where we're heading as a society? That's what scares me. Is that where we're heading as a society, that we just will start shutting down things we're not comfortable with completely? And that's the whole where we started with the idea of hate speech or, speech that you find offensive. It will get to a point where there's only a certain speech that's, derived from the federal government or states that decide this is what we feel comfortable with and this is what we're going to keep. Because then in essence, the First Amendment won't exist anymore.
My actual concern with the whole Facebook kerfuffle thing is that, so these platforms ban Alex Jones. I have a sense that if this happens a lot, other platforms will rise up that do host Alex Jones but ban CNN, and then be a pretty polarized society. I'm not really sure if we should have like these two separate internets that never interact. That's quite right. So there's a lot that people didn't anticipate. Like organizations can censor whatever they want, but then think about it twice. If the organization is so huge, that's like the only way to communicate. Which we're not at that point yet, but
And that's the thing that saddened me. And the reason we started this whole segment, A Heartbeat of the World, was, just after or just before the election, people were coming on my business show and voicing their opinion one way or another, whether they're right or left or Democrat or Republican. They were very strong in it and kind of very divisive and angry at the other side. And I'm thinking to myself, we're all the same country, folks. Can we have a reasonable conversation here and stop attacking each other? And you're right. What worries me is that we'll have a polarization where it's either one way or the other, and we have to be on two separate teams, and that's in a complete divided country. And we, when I sit down and talk to people, we're really not that different. We want to be able to provide for our families, love, be loved, have a great life, choose, the destiny of our, the job we want, the career we want. But, this is not working. So it's not a viable conversation.
This, which I thought was actually pretty great. He was like, there's no your team and my team. We are the team,
Exactly.
That is the situation. I don't think developing completely separate information ecosystem is a great idea.
Yeah.
We should debate things and argue about things, and we'll disagree all over the place. That's who we do. But yeah,
exactly. And that's why I wanted to have all sides come here and just chat about what really is the true essence of your values. What do you want to see in the country? How do you see us fixing it? And because that is a viable conversation where we can all come together as a total citizenry and come together and make the country better. Now, how do you see that we can combat this kind of diversive separate space where everyone wants to have their free speech, but separate, and then stop other one from their free speech? How do we come together as a citizenry where we have complete, solidarity?
Well, complete solidarity is probably
right. Too much to ask for right now. Maybe.
But I do think that when we talk about different political beliefs and views like that, it's so easy to get very entrenched in your position, which I understand. I get it. Once you've argued for something a lot, it's almost like you're not having a discussion anymore. You're just lobbing your points back and forth.
Yeah.
I honestly think that listening and talking with an open mind can be just helpful. Even if you disagree with someone completely by the end of it, at least you've kind of gotten a sense of where they're coming from. It's hard. I get it. We reach this point where you feel like, well, you disagree so fundamentally. Why should I make an effort to understand you? And it's almost like everyone has these beliefs, but it's almost like we don't really question. Most people don't have a completely firm black and white opinion about an issue. Usually your stance on any given issue is probably somewhere in the middle. Take me in the First Amendment. I absolutely believe in free speech. I run the First Amendment Center. But do I think that, there are certain types of speech, speech that threatens others' lives and things like that, where there be limits, I'm more or less supportive of a private organization, being able to choose who their employees are, because I think that's important. So you can see that my opinions are not completely black and white. And I think that's for everyone on every single issue. But when we get into an argument where you're trying to prove a point, you tend to get right into your extreme black and white stance. And I don't think it's helpful for learning and for conversations. Sorry, was that a roundabout answer to your question? But
no, but it's completely true, Lata, because I find when I talk to people, it's completely that way. They're not just one way or the other. And I don't know about you, but I kind of feel that what we've been getting from all media is either a completely black or white situation to look at certain topics. And I'm thinking it's not just black and white. I had a journalist on 2 or 3 years ago. He said, when I became investigative journalist, I realized there's not two sides to every story. There's several angles to a story. It could be hundreds of angles. It's several shades of gray. And until I started getting out into the field and talking to all the different components and people involved, I realized it's just not they're right and I'm right, or they're wrong and I'm right. It's much deeper than that.
Yeah, usually that's a very good point. That every issue doesn't have two sides. It probably has 50 sides, And it doesn't make you a worse conservative or a worse liberal to explore those sides, No. It just means you're a thoughtful person.
Yeah, and what I tend to say to people now is sit down with your neighbor, ask them why they think a certain way or what their stance is on something, instead of immediately shutting it down saying, this is the right way to be and this is the only way to be, because like this conversation we're having here, the only way we can start coming together and making this country better and to build a non-divisive, but it's a citizenry that's together, is to really start listening to each other, like you said. And I think starting with that, not just listening to an echo chamber of people that feel good to you and already agree with you, listen to the parts that feel icky and I don't know about that, because then you start to get an idea, like, Alex Jones. Okay, I find him a little nutty, maybe, but you listen to him, you're like, okay, what is he trying to say here? Let me try to get what he's talking about. See that stance, that point of view that maybe I don't agree with, that, what are they getting at? So I can understand where they're coming from.
I know what you mean. Although I listened to Alex Jones, I'm like, wow, this is like, I'm exercising my free speech here, saying, this is like tinfoil hat territory.
But yeah.
Which is, again, like, if I do feel that if that's what you want to listen to, I don't want to do it. I think there's something to be said where, a lot of people who called for him to be banned are saying, well, he has he has hateful rhetoric, which he does, and he says that are untrue, which he does, and so you shouldn't be disseminating this. But I do think that, I don't think necessarily saying that like this should not be available anywhere. Mm-hmm. I almost think that's like, that gives too much power to his words, and like now I feel like his downloads have like really skyrocketed since this.
Yeah.
So it's just, like he has a right to say crazy and hateful things.
Yeah, totally.
He does have a right to say, well, we're not going to post it, but like, I don't know if that's like the best and most efficient way
to deal with it.
With it.
Yeah.
Like, well, it kind of escalates it. It gives someone more importance than I think that they should have.
Yeah, exactly. And ever since, and it's funny because I would say before I started this segment, I was never political. Really never voted other than the presidential election, really, really bad. But like a lot of people, and then when this election happened, I was like, maybe I should start, knowing what's going on with my country and my government here and becoming more aware. And I think the good thing about everything that's happened is really it start to wake people up, like, what does this mean? What does the Constitution mean? What does the amendments mean? What does that mean for me as a citizen? And how do I become involved in the country? Because I think the whole point of the Constitution was that every citizen be involved in the running of the country. It wasn't just that this entity far out in DC will run everything and we get to sit here and wait for them to make laws and policies on our behalf. It was really that we be part of it. And so in essence, this has been good that it's woken us up to, okay, here's what we like, here's what we don't like. Now, how can we come together instead of divisive and fighting each other? Realize that, okay, we can come together as a group and say, here's what we don't like, here's what we can do to fix it.
That's right. I mean, I think with the First Amendment, essentially saying that you have the right to criticize your government, that you have the right to like ask for the laws that you want, you have the right to assemble and protest, that's like all, and the right to the free press, of course, what your government is doing. Mm-hmm. All that's so important just to like getting every citizen involved in a democracy. And I think if I can say one thing that I think is important that people miss about the First Amendment, because we talk about that, it's just that the First Amendment is indivisible. That basically my rights are your rights, even if I hate you and I disagree with everything you have to say. Mm-hmm. The same laws that can be used to suppress your speech can be used to suppress my speech. So much of the First Amendment these days, when people bring it up, some of that we lob it against each other. Like when Alex Jones gets taken down, there's like, oh my God, you're violating his First Amendment rights. But of course, like, when the press, when people like insult the press or like try to ban the press from different like press conferences, then other like people on the other side will call for First Amendment rights, and the other side will say kind of silent about it. No, it's all the same thing.
Yeah.
It's a rich tapestry where the First Amendment protects all of us, and we should be advocating for everyone's free speech and everyone's right to publish, even the people we hate.
Yeah.
We think that they have it doesn't have to be like, oh, I'm protecting your rights because I support your speech. It has to be more like, the old Voltaire quote where he said that I may not agree with anything you have to say, but I defend until the death your right to say it. It has to be an inseparable thing and not just my First Amendment rights, but not yours.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I had an attorney on 2 years ago who said to me, now listen, First Amendment rights aside, if you're in a crowded movie theater and you scream, fire, and there's no fire, will there be consequences? to that First Amendment little speech there? Probably, because everyone trampled each other and got hurt at the response of your actions. So there has to be responsibility to what's said. So yeah, I don't think the government should be stepping in, a federal government or any entity, and deciding here's what's good, here's what's not good to any party. But at the same time, we all as individuals have to decide responsibility to what we say. Don't go into a crowded, theater and say fire and see what happens, because,
That's actually, so there are forms of speech that aren't protected by the First Amendment. Anyone that's making threats on somebody else's life or threats to harm them. And one of them is like when you say something that'll incite immediate violence or legal action, there's things like that. So not everything's going to be protected. And I do agree that, another common thing that people say is that freedom of speech doesn't mean freedom from the consequences, which I think is true too. Like if you say something that's very offensive, the government should not be able to punish you for it or censor you, but other people will probably tell you that was very offensive. It's one of those things where we all do have to deal with the consequences of what we say. But I think we should also kind of realize that the whole idea of free expression, I don't think is like every expression of human beings is so valuable or amazing. It's just more like sometimes this is how we form our opinions and get things out by talking it through, by figuring things out, just by engaging in this vigorous debate. That's not a bad thing.
No, absolutely. So I'm glad that you were able to fill people in and give a deeper understanding to the First Amendment. For you, and seeing where we go as a country, what would you say be the best way to ensure free speech going forward for the citizenry, and what can the citizenry do around the country to ensure that we are all able to express our First Amendment right?
Oh, good question. First of all, pay attention. We watch the White House so closely these days. Pay attention to what your state and local governments are doing. Because there are several states right now that are trying to pass laws that would chill the right to protest, or kind of suppress some speech on college campuses, things like that. So pay attention to that stuff too. And it's important. It's like the kind of thing that sort of goes under the radar, but the thing about the First Amendment is that it seems like such an institution, it's the one that everybody kind of knows, right? But these things can be eroded over time if we're not careful about it. So keep watch on that. And also just remember that you're always going to be very passionate about defending the free speech and free press rights of the people you agree with. And you're always going to be kind of trying to find a loophole when it comes to what you disagree with. That is human tendency. We all do it. I understand completely, but try to suppress that urge. Try to separate what the speaker has to say from the concept of everyone being able to say something. I guess if that's possible, I think it's a good way to think of it.
Yeah, I totally agree, Lata, because actually when I sit down with people and I see them as human beings and we talk about their different points of view, I find for myself a lot of the things I thought I believed in, when I actually sat down and we go deep into it, I'm like, where did that belief come from? Is it something I truly believe in my heart? Is my value system? Or is it something I was told in school, that my family told me, the culture kind of drilled around me? Or is it something that truly reflects my values?
That's actually that's a great point, because I don't know how most people think about where their beliefs come from.
Yeah.
Most studies show that your beliefs are probably very similar to the people who live close to you and the people that you're friends with. And it's like, wow, what a coincidence that you all somehow have the same shared internal values. Now, I mean, just different things around you shape beliefs. It's good to be cognizant of that. It's good to think about what you actually think is important.
Yeah, I mean, for instance, there was a restaurant near me that had some waiters that were kind of not very good customer service, and they would give shabby customer service. And when I started my business a couple years ago, I decided there was certain behavior in my near existence I didn't like, which is one, being treated like crap when I go and pay for it. Yeah. So I decided from now on, when I go out somewhere, I'm not going to go to a place where there's bad customer service. So I went with my friends closest in the area, and they were like, well, gosh, you're so intolerant. Why don't you want to sit here? Because they're not so bad. I'm like, yeah, but I'm paying for bad customer service. Why would I do that? So, that's just stepping out of where I grew up from, where people are just taking a certain thing and saying they're okay with it, where I'm like, I'm not okay with that customer service anymore. So yeah, always just challenging what you think and your beliefs, and say, this truly reflects my values. It's a good way to start, and then you're more open to understanding other people's values and where they're coming from.
It's true. And I bet like you said, for a moment your friends were kind of like, what are you doing? Nobody does this, and that's I think that's also important. We're like when we're exploring our beliefs and like we're exploring like political issues and stuff like that, don't be afraid to like get into it with your friends, with people who like believe, who have similar beliefs. Because like, that's how you get like a more sophisticated understanding of issues, when you like really talk them through instead of just,
Yeah.
Absolutely,
Yeah, and then that way you realize, do I really know this issue, or do I need to go deeper into it and discover more about what I thought I knew about it? And yeah, so it could open all our minds. So this has been so awesome, Lata. Thank you so much. I want people to know where they can find out more about the First Amendment Center. Visit it if they're in DC. Share that with them.
Oh, of course. So we have an awesome website. Just go to freedomforuminstitute.org or firstamendmentcenter.org and you will get there. We've got amazing information about the First Amendment, primers that kind of get you up to speed on the complicated stuff. It's great. We also have a podcast called The First Five. So that's if you'd like to subscribe to that, that's always fun too. And when it comes to actually visiting actual location, we're located in the Newseum, which is in Washington, D.C. There's a great First Amendment gallery there. Would love people to visit. It's just a wonderful place.
Awesome. And now, does your forum also touch on understanding the other amendments, or really just focus on the First Amendment?
We're the First Amendment, all First Amendment all the time, but there's great places to learn about the other ones. Except the Third Amendment. That's the one about quartering British soldiers in your home. I don't think there's a Third Amendment center. Yeah.
Let's hope that doesn't come to a time where we need to focus on that one. But well, Lata, I just have to thank you again for coming to share your great wisdom today on Savvy Business Radio for our Heartbeat of the World segment. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. This has been fun.
Savvy Business Radio broadcasts worldwide via a large podcast network, celebrating business owners, entrepreneurs, influencers, and successful individuals. Find out about our paid sponsorship opportunities or how to become a guest. Call 732-474-7375 or email Christina@savvybusinessradio.com.